capture Jesus at night. And my hour, of which Jesus often spoke, had now arrived. From this moment on, only a few hours would pass before he was lifted up on the cross. John 13, verse 31 and 32, we read, "When he, that is Judas, had gone out, Jesus said, 'Now is the Son of Man glorified, and in him God is glorified. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him at once.'" In the departure of Judas, Jesus realized that the time of crisis had arrived. There is no turning back. The forces of evil are hurrying to execute him. But at the same time, the triumphant power of God is about to shine forth in spectacular brilliance. The glory of God is the perfection of God's character made visible. Something of God's glory is revealed, as the Apostle Paul says, or states, in his creation. For, quote, "Ever since the creation of the world, God's invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made." Romans 1, verse 20. Similarly, Psalm 19:1 says, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork." But now, Jesus, in his willing sacrifice of himself for the salvation of the world, will reveal an even more wonderful characteristic of God the Father, his wondrous grace and love. Jesus, the Son of Man, is also glorified for the perfect obedience, love, and grace that is in his heart. This shines forth in the most intense way possible as he dies upon a cross, bearing the guilt and punishment of the entire human race. Jesus said, "God the Father is glorified in him." For all that Jesus is and all that Jesus does is a revelation of the Father and of his will to save the world. St. Paul tells us that, quote, "God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them." 2 Corinthians chapter 5:19. In the sacrifice of Jesus, God's holiness and his hatred of sin and evil is clearly revealed. And at the same time, God's great mercy, which takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, is also shown forth. And this is a bright revelation of the glory of God. Thus both Jesus and his Father are glorified by his willing sacrifice on the cross. And by the resurrection of Jesus and his subsequent exaltation at the Father's right hand, the unlimited power of the Father will be revealed, and also his victory over Satan and the power of death will be revealed. Thus the Father will be glorified by what Jesus has done, and when the Father raises Jesus from the dead and makes him to be the first fruits of the resurrection and the ruler over all the world to come, thus the Father will also glorify his Son. With a deep tone of sadness, then, and tenderness in his voice, Jesus now speaks to his apostles. He says in verse 33, "Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come." Twice Jesus told the Jews, "You will seek me, and where I'm going, you cannot come," in chapter 7, verse 34, and chapter 8, verse 21. On both occasions, the Jews were perplexed and did not understand the meaning of his words. Now, Jesus solemnly tells his disciples that the same is true for them, and they also are puzzled. But that is where the similarity ends. For Jesus affectionately calls them little children, an expression which Jewish teachers often used when speaking to their pupils. Then, Jesus does not tell them, as he told the Jews, that they will not find him, nor does he say that they will die in their sins, as he told the Jewish leaders in chapter 8, verse 21. Instead, Jesus, in the following words, promises his disciples the opposite of what he told the Jews. Peter is told that he cannot follow Jesus now, but one day he will. And the whole group of disciples is assured that the departure of Jesus has in view the goal of their being with him in the Father's house forever. Chapter 14, verse 2 to 3. John chapter 13, verse 34. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. This is the supreme commandment which Jesus gave to his disciples, and through them to all of his followers. This isn't the only commandment Jesus has given, however. In the Gospel of Matthew alone, there are 83 commandments or precepts which Jesus gave to his disciples. But this command is basic to every other one. As Jesus is leaving his disciples, he doesn't give them a long list of tasks they must perform for him. Instead, he gives them a single commandment, the same for all of them: love each other. Nothing more than that. It seems too simple. Yet this commandment embraces our entire life. It claims all our strength. It applies to all our relationships. It accompanies us at every step we take, and it involves our heart and will in every deed or word we speak. It is a comprehensive commandment. And Jesus added, even as I have loved you, that you love one another. It is important that we know the kind of love that Jesus wants us to show toward each other. We need an example of such love, a model of the kind of loving he desires, and this is the model: even as I have loved you. We are to pattern our attitudes and actions after his example. And how did Jesus love? Well, he loved from his heart, not from the attractiveness or worthiness of the persons needing his love. We sometimes say that love is blind, or that love is a feeling. This may be true of a couple of teenagers in love, but such love is often infatuation. Such love may die as soon as the sheen and excitement wear off. But the love which Jesus modeled for us is a love which comes from God. Romans 5, verse 5. A love which Jesus displayed himself toward all people. A love which knows what people are in their hearts, which knows their strength and their weaknesses, their attractive ways and also their ugliness, their foolishness and their sinfulness, and still loves them. His love is not sentimentality. It is not dependent upon the worthiness or attractiveness of the other person, but a love which deeply cares about the other person, which considers their true needs and longs for their improvement and salvation. The disciples are to love each other with the same strong love with which Jesus had shown toward them every day, and which he displayed when he went to the cross bearing their sins. Verse 35, by this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. If the same strong love which Jesus had constantly displayed toward his disciples, if this was in them and displayed by his disciples in their relationships with each other, it would become the hallmark, the unique distinguishing trait by which all men would recognize them as his followers. When one among them sinned, they would forgive. When one was weak and fell, they would lift him up. If one had a need, the others would supply it. Thus they would display God's love even as Jesus had done. Similarly, also in our day and age, When Christians display the same kind of strong love toward each other, it becomes an equally powerful means by which all men will know that we are His disciples, a testimony to the truth of our religion as in the days of the apostles. John 13, verse 36. Simon Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you shall follow afterward." Peter's heart was usually in the right place, but his head was often lagging behind. He could not understand where Jesus could go that Peter couldn't also go with him. Jesus indeed knew the way of suffering and death would eventually become the way to glory for Peter also, but now was not the time. First, Jesus himself must travel this painful road, and then much later, after a lifetime of loving service, Peter too would walk the same path of suffering and death as his Lord had walked before him. Verse 37, Peter said to him, "Lord, why cannot I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Peter's heart was right, but he didn't know or realize the weakness of his own nature. When the time actually came, when being associated with Jesus was life-threatening, he failed miserably. John 13:38, Jesus answered, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the cock will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. Notice how Jesus repeated Peter's bold claim, "I will lay down my life for you." It's as though Jesus said, "Oh, really? You're willing to lay down your life for me? Well, I hate to tell you this, but before a rooster crows 3 times, you will have denied me, denied you even knew me 3 times. Peter proudly, greatly overestimated his own loyalty and strength. And he also underestimated the world and its hateful taunts and scornful derision. He couldn't even stand up before the skeptical questions and taunts of a lowly maid while warming himself near the fire.